Upon entering the living room, Sarah's habitual self-assured smile faltered. She clutching a bunch of white lilies, their previously romantic scent now tainted by suspicion. Her gaze fell upon the wall that once showcased their wedding photo, now vacant and frosty. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. David, lounging on the couch with an uncanny composure, glanced up at her, his gaze piercing. "Is there something amiss, Sarah?" he inquired, his voice as unyielding as a knife's edge. She stood frozen, draining of color, unable to respond to the question she anticipated. But before we delve into the narrative, let me hear from you about where you're tuned in from in the comments below. And if you appreciate tales such as this, remember to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new installment. Here we go. David sat in silence, surrounded by the once joyous room, echoing with laughter and stories. In his grasp was an aged book, a birthday present from Sarah. Today, the pages failed to carry him beyond the harshness of reality. The room's air weighed heavily, dense with an oppressive discomfort, broken only by the subtle fragrance of white lilies. Once emblematic of untainted love, the blossoms now stirred nothing but deceit and treachery within him. The waning afternoon sun shone through the drapes, illuminating relics that bore silent testament to their past love. On the wall, a wooden clock, a wedding anniversary gift, ticked monotonously. Each resonant chime widened the rift between the two inhabitants of the house. David's gaze momentarily settled on the clock before diverting away. For him, time had transformed into an endless sequence of falsehoods. In one corner of the room, where a grand wedding portrait once adorned the wall, there now hung a desolate emptiness. He removed it that morning, not out of forgetfulness, but because it had become a more unbearable reminder of pain than he could endure. In her resplendent white gown and grin that appeared to hold the cosmos, Sarah's image pierced David's heart. Void wasn't just on the wall, but permeated their shattered relationship's cracks. David set down his book, his stare distant. He endeavored to present a composed exterior, but his fingers tightly gripping the table's edge belied the profound torment within. Sarah, once his universe, now seemed a pristine mask concealing deception. Underneath her immaculate veneer, he was now noticing cracks he had previously ignored. The air in the room was tense, hinting at an impending tempest. David cast a glance outside, where the setting sun's dwindling light mirrored his waning affection. His determination strengthened. Truth would be uncovered, and he prepared to face it, regardless of its severity. The door trembled subtly as the key turned in the lock. A subtle noise reverberated through the quiet house, disturbing the dense air as if creating ripples across a tranquil lake. David stared unwaveringly at the clock hanging on the wall, its hands relentlessly ticking, seemingly oblivious to the tension brewing nearby. From the hallway came Sarah's voice, sweet and odd, "Dear, I'm home." The clatter of her heels against the wooden floor echoed through the room, each step resonating heavily in David's thoughts. He once took pleasure in that sound, each footfall symbolizing her return from a long day, the happiness of reuniting. Today, however, every step brought an ominous pressure, like counting down to an unavoidable argument. Turning his head, David looked at her with a composed expression, though inside he felt a tempestuous turmoil. Sarah walked into the living room with a smile, but for a moment, her gaze averted from the vacant spot on the wall where their wedding photo once hung. She momentarily halted, smoothed her hair, and set a bouquet of white lilies on the table, her smile becoming more radiant. "I spotted these blossoms and found them quite stunning," she remarked, attempting to keep her voice casual. "So I decided to purchase them for you. Aren't lilies your favorite, after all?" she inquired. David cast a glance towards the bouquet, its clean white petals and golden stamens radiating an air of untainted innocence. However, these flowers no longer represented affection to him. Instead, their pristine appearance now felt like a facade concealing reality, pure on the surface, but decaying beneath. He responded with a subtle nod, his lips remaining still, as his eyes met Sarah's hands gripping the bouquet. Her fingers trembled slightly, revealing an apprehension she couldn't mask. The atmosphere between them grew denser, burdened by unsaid words. Sarah's gaze wandered around the room, settling on a bowl of keys on the shelf. where David had strategically placed two movie tickets meant for someone else. In that instant, he noticed a flash of understanding in her eyes. She had started to suspect something wasn't right, yet she masked her worry with a casual smile, a tactic David recognized well, used to divert suspicion. "What do you need?" This time, he was prepared. David stayed seated on the sofa, his eyes tracking Sarah's actions. His face revealed no emotion, making it seem as if her presence held no importance to him. However, inside, the pain pierced deeply, like knives slicing through his chest. But he had learned to conceal it behind an unyielding facade. He idly turned a page in the book, yet nothing from the text reached his consciousness. Sarah, placing the bouquet of lilies on the table, attempted to look relaxed, but her unsettled eyes told a different tale. She approached the bookshelf, running her fingertip along its dusty surface before stopping. The wedding photo was no longer in its customary place. For a fleeting instant, her eyebrows knitted, but she swiftly regained her composure, addressing David with an insincere grin. "Where's the wedding photograph?" she inquired softly, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. David met her gaze, his eyes icy. "I assumed it no longer fit the decor," he retorted, his speech measured and intensifying the chasm between them. Sarah pressed her lips together, a hint of worry flashing across her eyes. She feigned searching for something, though it was an ineffective effort to conceal her feelings. Guided by her feet, she approached the tiny shelf housing the key bowl. Upon setting her gaze upon it, she halted. Inside the container lay two neatly arranged movie tickets from last night's showing, a romantic film she had not previously known about. "Cinema tickets," Sarah queried, striving to maintain an even tone despite the palpable tension in each word. She grabbed one ticket and scrutinized it, hoping for some reasonable explanation to appear. "Did you go to the movies last night, David?" A faint smile tugged at his lips, but his eyes remained unmoved. "Yes," he answered, finding some solace in solitude seemed appealing. At times, being alone can offer a clearer perspective. "Oh." Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around nothing on her sides. She tried to mask her discomfort, but David could sense it in her subtle shifts, the nervous twirl of hair, her evasive glances, and the erratic rhythm of her breaths. The room seemed heavier. The clocks ticking, once soothing, now echoed ominously. Sarah turned to face David again, trying to change the subject. "You didn't mention it," she said, her voice faltering. David spoke softly. "There are numerous things we've kept hidden from each other, Sarah." His words caused her to stiffen, wiping away her usual smile, revealing an undercurrent of disquiet instead. She attempted to respond, but found herself speechless. David didn't press for explanations. Instead, he moved deliberately towards the table adorned with lilies, their unblemished beauty and stillness palpable. His fingers traced gently over the petals before his gaze returned to Sarah. "What do you make of these lilies?" he inquired, his tone even but cold. Sarah stood motionless. "They're lovely and innocent," she replied hesitantly, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "Indeed, yet not everything that appears beautiful is what it truly is," David observed, his gaze probing through the veneer of perfection she strove to uphold. The air in the room became heavy and oppressive, with each second prolonging into infinity. Sarah stayed silent, and David didn't require her to speak. All the puzzle pieces were falling neatly into place. A tempest was imminent. Sarah struggled to keep composed, but her uneasiness was palpable. Her eyes darted to the vacant space on the wall where their wedding picture used to be. Her gaze flitted, as if seeking a logical justification before she eventually voiced her question. "David," she said, her voice slightly quivering, although she attempted to conceal it with an air of feigned kindness. "Why did you take down our wedding photo? Where is it now?" David looked up from his book, his gaze as tranquil and unwavering as a motionless lake. He didn't respond promptly, instead letting the weighty silence permeate between them. After what seemed an eternity, he closed the book and placed it on the table. "It doesn't fit there anymore," he said, his tone even yet frosty. Sarah knit her brows and absently twisted a strand of hair, a habitual gesture when she felt troubled. "What do you mean doesn't belong? It's our wedding picture." You used to say it was the most valuable item for you. I realized we had a terrible divorce when I found out the truth, he answered. Yes, David responded, meeting her eyes squarely. It was precious. But now, it's merely a reminder of what's been taken away. His words caused Sarah to take a slight step back, as if each phrase stabbed at her self-assurance. David, what are you suggesting? She asked softly, the apprehension in her voice becoming more evident. David folded his arms and leaned back in his chair, maintaining an outward calm that seemed almost chilling, as though he had been anticipating this encounter for some time. Sarah, he said calmly, don't you see? The empty space on the wall? It mirrors the void in our relationship. Sarah tried to speak, but no words came forth. Sarah clutched her shirt's bottom. The trembling of her fingers exposed her hidden unease. I don't see why you're saying this, she managed to keep her tone even. Haven't we been through so much together? She questioned as she removed the picture without discussion. David leaned near, his gaze intense and voice coldly gentle. Do you think I shouldn't have taken it down? But what about the secrets you've kept from me, Sarah? He posed. Isn't it my right to know these things, or are they also too awkward to discuss? His words struck her forcefully. Sarah's composure faltered, her eyes filling with bewilderment and terror. David, what do you mean? She whispered, the vigor in her voice now absent. David stated, speaking calmly and clearly, what I'm expressing is that when something ceases to embody truth, retaining it merely signifies deceiving oneself. Sarah remained motionless, hesitant to advance, as if each of David's words constructed an intangible barrier. She nervously bit her lower lip, her eyes flitting between remorse and apprehension. David, I'm sorry if my actions have caused you to feel this way, she attempted to redirect the conversation. Yet, David didn't offer an escape route. You're fully aware of what has led to these feelings, Sarah, he retorted, maintaining his steady gaze. Don't express regret for things you haven't acknowledged yet. The atmosphere between them became taut. The tension was palpable. Both could sense it, but this time David held the power. He knew the truth would eventually surface. The silence in the room deepened, becoming almost oppressive. Sarah faced him, her stance rigid yet attempting to uphold years of cultivated poise. However, fissures were emerging. Her fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the table edge, and her smile wavered whenever their gazes locked. Eventually, David ended the silence, his voice soft and precise. Sarah, he initiated, leaning back in his seat. For how long do you intend to feign? She gasped slightly, appearing momentarily puzzled or perhaps merely postponing. Feign? What are you referring to? David tilted his head, his countenance enigmatic, but his eyes penetrating. Don't pretend ignorance. You're more capable than that, or at least you once were. Sarah blinked rapidly, her polished veneer fracturing further. David, if this is about the picture, this isn't concerning the picture, David cut in sharply. His tone wasn't loud, but it radiated enough gravity to make Sarah recoil. It's about everything else. The sleepless nights, the deceptions, the revelations, perfume. He paused on that word, noticing her complexion pale. Her hands fell to her sides, and she took a hesitant step forward. David, what are you saying? He moved closer now, maintaining a composed yet angry tone. I'm saying I know. About the dinners, the messages, him. Ah, he replied. Sarah's face drained of color, and her mouth parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. Her polished exterior, the intricately designed mask she wore, began to falter before his gaze. For how long have you known? She finally murmured, her voice quivering. David offered a bitter smirk. Long enough, or it's over, she stated icily. Her surprise transformed into desperation. It wasn't as you think. It held no significance. He chuckled without mirth. No significance? That's your explanation? His voice softened, but the intensity remained. You've ruined everything we'd created, and now you're telling me it held no significance. Sarah smiled, tears brimming in her eyes, her breaths unsteady. David, please. I erred, but there's still time. We can mend this. He retreated, shaking his head. We can't fix this, Sarah. You can't gloss over it with excuses or hollow promises. His voice softened, yet his eyes remained resolute. You made your decisions. Now you must face the consequences. As the words hung in the air, Sarah looked at him, her polished facade now completely shattered. For the first time, she realized there was no hiding place from the truth. David had seen through everything, and he refused to be a part of her meticulously constructed delusion. David acted with deliberate calmness, reaching for the small, nondescript wooden box on the side table. The room seemed to grow chillier as he set it down on the coffee table between them. The box, marked by worn edges and a tranquil exterior, stood in stark contrast to the turbulent feelings it harbored. "Recognize this, Sarah?" he inquired, maintaining an even tone despite the suppressed agony reflected in his eyes. Sarah scrutinized the box as if it were a living entity poised to strike. Her hands involuntarily tightened at her sides. "David, you're not telling the truth," he retorted, his voice crisp yet restrained. "You've deceived enough already." He then opened the box. The soft creak of the hinges reverberated in the heavy silence. Nestled within, a pile of bank statements greeted their exposure, David carefully extracting them and scattering them on the table. His fingers quivered subtly, not from uncertainty, but from the burden of what he was about to reveal. "These," he stated, tapping the documents, "detail every meal, every present, payments inconsistent with our shared experiences, luxurious dining venues I've never visited, jewelry I've never seen." Sarah remained silent, her lips parted and no words emerging. Her gaze darted to the documents, scouring them hastily, searching for any inconsistency. David didn't pause. He delved deeper into the box, retrieving phone records. The list was extensive, numbers recurring frequently. A specific name stood out, highlighted. "See this," he persisted, arranging the records next to the bank statements. "These are your call logs, Sarah. Morning, midday, evening. Even when I was in the same room as you." His voice trembled slightly, but he held his composure, hiding most of his agony. Tears began to form in Sarah's eyes as she stammered, "David, it wasn't, quote, it isn't what you believe." "Not what I think," he interrupted her, his voice rising subtly for the first time. "Don't belittle me by feigning this is something less than it is." In the end, David reached for the final item in the box, a collection of photographs. He arranged the proofs atop other incriminating items, displaying them decisively. The images portrayed compromising instances, furtive glances stolen, hands lingering excessively, and smiles that whispered betrayal. Sarah let out a sharp gasp, her hand instantly flying to her mouth. "David, please," she pleaded, but he was not yet finished. With deliberate slowness, bordering on ritualistic, he extracted the last piece from the box, a folded, slightly yellowed letter. "This," he whispered softly, "is the most difficult thing I've ever written." He carefully unfolded the note, the creases deep from repeated readings. Without further words, he passed it to her. Sarah hesitated but accepted the letter, her hands trembling. As she perused the contents, David observed the emotions play across her face: shock, guilt, and ultimately despair. The letter, though simple in its structure, carried the profound weight of his heartache. "Sarah," it read, "I loved you with every ounce I possessed. Trusting and confiding in you, I constructed my life around your presence. However, faith can be delicate, and bit by bit, you shattered it. Endless nights, hollow excuses, deceit, they did not merely fracture my heart, but also the very essence of our bond. This container isn't meant for retribution, but for understanding. I needed to perceive reality clearly, even when the pain was more than I had ever anticipated. You may view it as an error, but I see it as a conscious decision, one you repeatedly made." Upon completion of her reading, Sarah's hands grew limp, letting go of the letter which fluttered onto the table. Streams of tears traced their way down her face, yet David felt no triumph, only an echoing void. The quiet lengthened, the ticking clock the sole intrusion. Eventually, David broke the silence, his voice barely audible. "This is it, Sarah. This is truth. No matter how much you deny it, it won't alter what lies before you." Sarah glanced up at him, her once polished facade utterly shattered. For the first instance, she found herself without words, explanations, or a veil to conceal her actions. David remained standing, allowing her to grapple with the repercussions of her decisions, the burden of her deceit settling upon her. Eventually, Sarah spoke up, her voice quivering as she sought to construct an alibi. David, I didn't intend for this to transpire. It was a lapse in judgment. David regarded her, his countenance a blend of incredulity and smoldering anger. He shook his head gently, moving closer, maintaining a firm but measured tone. A lapse in judgment, Sarah. That is what you call this. No, a lapse in judgment is leaving the key in the ignition. A lapse in judgment is tripping over a cord. What you did, his voice stiffened, was not a lapse in judgment. She recoiled at his words, yet he persisted. Do you recall how many times I convinced myself that I was mistaken, that I was being overly suspicious? His eyes glowed with intensity as he went on. Can you remember all the nights when you returned home late, reeking of a fragrance not your own? Your flippant dismissal of the issue, claiming it was from a colleague's embrace, or the inconsistencies in your work stories never adding up. Rain's countenance grew grim, though he could not control it. David's voice trembled slightly as he breathed deeply, gathering himself before speaking again. Sarah, I wanted to trust you, I truly did. I ignored every warning sign because I so desperately wanted to believe in you. Sarah moved hesitantly towards him, tears cascading down her cheeks. I know I've hurt you, David, but I didn't intend to. Intended to, David retorted, his voice growing slightly stern. Every dinner, every call, every deception. You didn't intend it. Don't belittle me by feigning ignorance about this being an accident. Her sobs grew louder, but David stood firm. He took a step back, increasing the space between them, his body stiff and resolute. Pausing thoughtfully, he considered her compassion, feeling his heart race as countless thoughts swirled in his mind. Have you ever spent a night alone, pondering your location, doubting each word that passed your lips because the truth seemed to grow increasingly elusive day by day? His voice softened, but every utterance carried the force of a blow. Sarah crumpled into the seat behind her, hiding her face in her hands and whispering sorrowfully, I'm sorry. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. But can't we make amends? David gazed at her, once tender eyes now absent. Make amends? He echoed softly. Then, shaking his head, he answered, No, Sarah. You can't mend what you've broken, and you can't undo the decisions you made. The air in the room thickened with his words, silencing any potential response from her. The harm was done, and for David, there was no going back. David exhaled slowly, maintaining a steady tone despite the silence. Sarah, he began, I've reached my decision. This wasn't a hasty choice, and it can't be reversed. I'm leaving. Her gaze shot up, trails of tears marking her face, but disbelief was evident in her eyes. David, no, you can't mean that. We can discuss this, find a solution. He shook his head resolutely. I've already begun preparations, he replied calmly, distancing himself from the emotional upheaval that had filled the room mere moments ago. My belongings are packed. The divorce documents are ready. I even filed them this morning. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her chest as if his words struck her physically. No, David, please don't do this. We can mend this. Whatever it takes, I will. Change, I will, he interrupted decisively. Every falsehood you uttered, every instance you faced me and opted to deceive, led us here inevitably. He paused, his eyes softening as they met hers, witnessing her crumble beneath his gaze. This isn't about vengeance or rage anymore. It's about liberation. I will not reside in a home constructed on deceit. I deserve more than this. And truthfully, so do you. The weight of his words seemed to envelop her as she sank deeper into the chair, tears trickling silently. David straightened up, his voice steady but conclusive. The prenuptial agreement, he began, was something I had hoped would remain untouched. I signed it because I believed in your honesty. But, she completed his sentence, here we are. His lips curled into a bittersweet smile. Isn't it ironic, he mused, that the agreement we deemed formal was now my safeguard? With each word, David felt a strange tranquility envelop him. The decision had been made, and there was nothing left to burden him. David surveyed the room one final time, his gaze resting on the vacant spot where their wedding picture used to be. "Everything's wrapped up, Sarah," he murmured. "The movers will take the rest of my belongings tomorrow, and by the end of this, we'll both start anew with clean slates." With those words, David departed. For the first time in months, he felt as if a burden of deception had been shed from his shoulders. Though leaving brought pain, it also brought relief, and a fresh start lay just beyond that door. As he exited, closing the door behind him, the silence seemed oppressive. Sarah remained still in her chair, her face streaked with tears, frozen in disbelief. Gradually, her sight settled upon the table nearby, where lay bank statements, phone logs, photos, and a letter grim mementos that starkly confirmed the reality she could no longer evade. Her hands quivered as they reached for one of the pictures, tracing over its glossy veneer like an attempt to expunge the incriminating proof. The burden of it felt unendurable. The truth crashed upon her in successive waves, each stronger than the last. Her breath shortened, became irregular, and eventually succumbed to a soul-rending sob that reverberated through the vacant chamber. Sarah fell to her knees, gripping the photo firmly against her, her body convulsed with each sob as she folded in on herself amidst the tangible representations of her deception. The bouquet of white lilies remained undisturbed on the table, now a hollow, taunting emblem of everything she had endeavored to conceal. "David," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling under distress, "please don't abandon me, please." She inched towards the table, her shaking hands reaching for the letter David had abandoned. Gathering it close, she reread it through teary, blurred eyes. Each word pierced more painfully, etching into her the truth of how deeply she had believed him. Her voice grew desperate as she called out again, "David, you pledged for better or worse. That was our vow. You swore me eternal devotion." Her words were strangled by sobs. Yet silence met her pleas. The emptiness left by David's absence weighed heavily upon her, an unfillable chasm. The room, once filled with cherished memories, felt frigid now. Sarah held the letter in one hand and a photograph in the other, shivering as she sat on the floor, enveloped by the reality she had refused to acknowledge for so long. Only the distant sound of David's car driving away answered her cries. Her eyes welled up as she stared at the vacant space on the wall where their wedding photo had been, tears streaming down her face unabatedly. Even as she murmured his name one last time, her voice rang hollow, swallowed by the void of the present. The silence in the room was deafening, and she felt the burden of her own decisions. David stood in the doorway with his suitcase, the familiar heft of it anchoring him to reality. He looked back once more, scanning the house that had been their haven. As twilight cast long shadows on the walls, they seemed to reverberate with memories of a life, no longer tangible laughter, hushed conversations, vows. All vanished, leaving behind an eerie quietude. For a moment, he paused, taking one final look at the living room. The table was still littered with remnants of Sarah's infidelity, and her sobs, soft and muffled, filtered through from another room. But they no longer caused him pain. The thing was just there, like an old floorboard's creak or distant traffic hum. No anger, no contentment, only a peculiar quiet determination surged within him. Stepping outdoors, he shut the door softly. The lock's click echoed, decisive and irrevocable. All remained still. The cool, crisp air outside carried the subtle aroma of freshly mown grass. A gentle breeze caressed his face, and David took a deep breath, savoring the freedom it brought into his lungs. It had been a long time since he experienced such unbridled breathing. Above him, the sky extended vastly, colored in soft tones of pink and gold, as if the universe was presenting him with a fresh start. The suitcase's wheels glided effortlessly over the driveway as he moved towards his car, the rhythmic sound harmonizing with the leaves rustling in the wind. He carefully placed the suitcase inside the trunk, each movement precise but tranquil. With one final glance at the mirror, David settled into the driver's seat. His home stood still, its windows mirroring the sunset, merely a testament to what was gone. Without delay, he ignited the engine, the sound comforting and steadfast. The road ahead beckoned, boundless and clear, symbolizing liberty and a fresh start. As the car advanced, David felt the burden of the past dissipate, leaving him lighter than he had been in years. As the car accelerated on the open highway, David allowed his mind to roam, freed from the weight that had weighed on him for so long. The wind whipping through the cracked window felt invigorating and vivifying, grazing his face like a tender hint of his new freedom. For the first time in what seemed an eternity, his heart didn't feel heavy, and his thoughts weren't shrouded by uncertainty or suspicion. This wasn't about retaliation. He harbored no desire for bitterness or reprisal. This was about rediscovering himself, his self-esteem, mental tranquility, and the aspects of him that were worn down by deceit. He understood that departing wasn't a symbol of weakness, but of power. Abandoning a life based on untruths was the sole means to genuinely respect the person he was and the future he deserved. As he looked out the window, his eyes fell upon wildflowers blooming beside the road. Despite their imperfections, wilting stems from the wind, bruised petals due to the elements, they stood robustly, flourishing in a place where no one seemed to care for them. He couldn't help but see himself mirrored in them, not pristine but unbound. The wildflowers seemed to murmur a soft truth. Survival doesn't necessitate perfection, it requires determination. David offered a faint smile, tapping lightly on the steering wheel, as a wave of understanding enveloped him. The path extended endlessly before him, an expansive blank space where he could create a novel existence, unburdened by treachery and deceit. This life, he hadn't envisioned weeks earlier, was now attainable. As the sun sank lower on the horizon, it bathed the landscapes in a golden radiance, tinting the sky with comforting tones of orange and pink. David cast one final glance in the rearview mirror. The house was now distant, its shape barely discernible against the dwindling light. It no longer belonged to him, nor was it his home anymore. Fixating on the road ahead, a feeling of finality resonated within him. The deceptions, the sorrow, the endless hours of doubt, they were all history now, left behind like a story concluded for good. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel not out of anxiety but resolve. The vehicle purred consistently as it advanced, transporting him toward the unfamiliar. For the first time, uncertainty didn't frighten him. Instead, it invigorated him. Uncharted was the path before him, yet he held the tool to script it. The fragile beauty of the roadside blossoms dwindled, yet their essence persisted within his thoughts. They served as reminders that even in the seemingly unpromising landscapes, life can bloom vibrantly. As the dying rays of light steered him further, David prepared himself for whatever was to come. There was no turning back now. Just the vast highway, the hint of liberty, and the vow of a life lived according to his will.